The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and maritime attorney David Chen, 42, read it 3 times before his hands started shaking. $300,000. The Lakeside Estates. HOA was fining him $300,000 for unauthorized watercraft mooring on the community pier, the same pier his grandfather had built in 1973 and deeded to the neighborhood as a gift. The same pier David had used for 38 years without incident. But 6 months ago, new HOA board members had taken over, and suddenly David's 17-foot fishing boat was a violation. Tonight, David wasn't just angry. He was pulling out every property record, every deed, and every legal precedent he'd spent 2 decades mastering, because these people had just picked a fight with the wrong attorney. Before we dive into how David dismantled an entire HOA board with documents they should have read first, if you love stories where entitled people discover they've targeted the absolute worst person possible, hit that like button and subscribe. Now let's see exactly how this unfolded. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a maritime law expert too far, the confrontation where decades of legal expertise met entitled incompetence, and the resolution where an entire HOA board learned what happens when you threaten someone who actually reads property deeds. The first outline takes us through David's emotional journey as the HOA escalated, from polite notices to threatening legal action. We'll feel the weight of watching his family's legacy weaponized against him, the frustration of dealing with board members who refused to listen to reason, and the precise moment when David stopped trying to educate them and started building a case that would change everything. The toll it took wasn't just financial, it was personal. Watching strangers claim ownership of something his grandfather had gifted out of generosity. The second outline reveals the courtroom confrontation where David presented evidence the HOA never saw coming. We'll witness the board president's confidence crumble as David introduced historical surveys, original deeds, and legal precedents that proved they'd been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of property law for 6 months. The power shift was immediate and devastating. The third outline delivers justice as the judge's ruling didn't just dismiss the fine, it stripped the HOA of rights they'd assumed they had for decades. We'll see consequences unfold, board members resign, and David finally enjoy the peace his family earned generations ago. Here's exactly how it happened. David Chen had practiced maritime and property law in Seattle for 19 years, specializing in waterfront disputes and easement cases. His home office overlooked Lake Washington, where his 17-foot Boston whaler sat moored at the Lakeside Estates community pier, the same spot where he'd learned to fish with his grandfather Chen Wei in 1986. David's grandfather had emigrated from Taiwan in 1968, built a successful construction company, and in 1973 constructed the entire 200-foot pier as a gift to the then small waterfront community. The deed was clear. The Chen family retained perpetual mooring rights for 2 vessels at the pier's north end, while the remaining spaces would serve all residents equally. For 38 years, this arrangement had worked perfectly. David, his wife Rachel, and their 2 teenagers enjoyed weekend fishing trips, and the community had a beautiful pier they'd never had to fund themselves. Everyone understood the history. Everyone respected the arrangement. Until February, when 3 new board members were elected to the Lakeside Estates HOA. The first notice arrived in March, slipped under David's door while he was in court. Violation notice, unauthorized extended mooring. Your vessel has exceeded the 48-hour guest mooring limit. Please remove within 72 hours or face daily fines. David read it twice, confused. His boat wasn't in a guest slip. It was in the Chen family's designated spot, clearly marked on the pier diagram filed with King County in 1973. He called the new HOA president, Melissa Hartwell, a real estate investor who'd purchased her lakefront property just 8 months prior. Ms. Hartwell, I think there's been a mistake. My family has permanent mooring rights documented in the original pier deed. Melissa's voice dripped with condescension. Mr. Chen, HOA rules supersede any alleged agreements from decades ago. All residents follow the same rules now. 48 hours maximum. Remove your boat or face consequences. 2 weeks later, a second notice appeared. This one threatened daily fines of $100. David responded with a certified letter attaching copies of the 1973 deed, his grandfather's construction permits, and the recorded easement agreement. He even included a brief legal analysis explaining why HOA bylaws couldn't override recorded property rights. The response came from the HOA's attorney, a recent law school graduate who specialized in residential disputes, not property law. Your claimed rights are unsubstantiated. Comply immediately. David felt his professional pride wounded. He was being lectured on property law by someone who clearly hadn't researched the case. In May, the situation exploded. David returned from a weekend fishing trip with his daughter to find his boat locked to the pier with an industrial chain and a notice duct taped to the windshield. Violation, final notice. Vessel impounded pending fine payment and removal. Total fines, $6,400. Failure to comply will result in legal action and vessel seizure. David's hands trembled as he photographed everything. His daughter, Emma, 16 and already accepted to Stanford's pre-law program, watched her father's face shift from shock to cold calculation. Dad, can they actually do this? David stared at the chain wrapped around his family's boat. Secured to the pier his grandfather had literally built with his own hands, and something fundamental changed in his chest. He spent the next week doing what he should have done from the start. He stopped trying to reason with people who wouldn't listen and started building a legal case that would withstand appellate review. David pulled every property record filed in King County since 1970, researched Washington state easement law back to territorial days, and contacted the 3 surviving members of the original 1973 Homeowners Association who'd accepted his grandfather's generous gift. When the certified letter arrived in June demanding $300,000 for 6 months of unauthorized mooring, legal fees, and punitive damages, David actually smiled. Because in Washington state, you don't just fine someone $300,000 without bulletproof documentation. And on July 15th, David filed his response in King County Superior Court. If they wanted to play legal games, he'd show them what a maritime attorney with a perfect track record actually looked like in court. The courtroom filled quickly on August 3rd, a Thursday morning when Seattle's summer heat made the old courthouse feel stuffy despite the air conditioning. David sat at the plaintiff's table, technically defendant, but he'd filed a countersuit so comprehensive that the roles had effectively reversed. His briefcase contained 47 exhibits, professionally tabbed and organized chronologically. Across the aisle, Melissa Hartwell sat with 2 other board members and their attorney, Jake Morrison, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as he shuffled through papers. Judge Patricia Yamamoto, 62, and known for her expertise in property disputes, entered precisely at 9. Good morning. I've reviewed the briefs. Mr. Chen, you're representing yourself? David stood. Yes, Your Honor. This falls squarely within my area of expertise. Judge Yamamoto's slight smile suggested she'd already read his credentials. Morrison opened with confidence, presenting the HOA's case. Your Honor, this is straightforward. Mr. Chen has violated clearly established community rules for 6 months despite repeated warnings. The HOA has the authority to enforce uniform standards, and Mr. Chen's refusal to comply has cost the association significant resources. We're seeking $300,000 in damages and immediate vessel removal. He sat down, looking satisfied. Melissa whispered something to him, nodding. David stood slowly, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 19 years practicing law. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A, the original 1973 property deed showing my grandfather, Chen Wei, owned the waterfront parcel that included the current pier location. Exhibit B shows the construction permits he personally obtained. Exhibit C is the recorded easement agreement, filed with King County on November 12, 1973, granting the Lakeside Estates community access to the pier my grandfather built at his own expense of $47,000, equivalent to $320,000 today in exchange for perpetual mooring rights for the Chen family at the north end. This easement was signed by all 12 original homeowners and was properly recorded, making it binding on all subsequent owners. Morrison stood quickly. Your Honor, even if such an agreement existed, modern HOA bylaws take precedence. Judge Yamamoto raised her hand. Mr. Morrison, recorded easements don't simply disappear because new bylaws are written. Please sit down. Mr. Chen, continue. David placed a large diagram on the easel. Your Honor, this is the original pier design, signed by my grandfather and the county inspector. The north end, marked here in blue, was specifically designated for Chen family use. This isn't a courtesy or a handshake deal. It's a recorded property right that runs with the land. When Ms. Hartwell purchased her property last year, this easement was in her title report. She had constructive notice. He produced another document. Here's her title insurance policy. Page 7, paragraph 3. The easement is explicitly listed. Melissa's face drained of color. She grabbed Morrison's arm, whispering urgently. Morrison stood again, his confidence evaporating. Your Honor, my clients were not adequately informed. David interrupted, his tone sharp. Your clients were perfectly informed. They chose to ignore recorded property rights because they personally disliked the arrangement. Exhibit M is an email from Ms. Hartwell to board members stating, I don't care what some old documents say, we're not letting one family have special privileges. The courtroom went silent. Judge Yamamoto looked directly at Melissa. Ms. Hartwell, did you write that email? Melissa stammered. It was taken out of context, David continued. Your Honor, the HOA didn't just violate my easement rights. They physically impounded my vessel without legal authority, charged me $300,000 in fabricated fines, and hired an attorney who failed to conduct basic title research. I'm not asking for damages. I'm asking for declaratory relief confirming my family's easement rights, immediate removal of all fines, and attorney's fees for defending against a frivolous action that should never have been filed. He paused, then added quietly, And, Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit R, the original 1973 Pier construction agreement. It states that if the HOA ever attempts to revoke Chen family mooring rights, the entire pier reverts to the Chen family, and the community easement is terminated. Morrison went pale. Melissa looked like she might be sick. David sat down. The HOA has 200 residents who use that pier daily. My grandfather gave them that gift. The board tried to take mine. I'm simply asking the court to enforce what was legally agreed upon 51 years ago. Judge Yamamoto removed her glasses. I'll have a ruling by tomorrow morning. Court is adjourned. Judge Yamamoto's ruling came at 8:30 the next morning, delivered via email and filed electronically. David read it on his phone while drinking coffee on his deck, his boat still chained at the pier below. The judge's words were precise and devastating to the HOA. The Chen family easement is valid, properly recorded, and binding on all subsequent property owners. The HOA's fines are vacated in their entirety. The HOA is ordered to pay Mr. Chen's attorney's fees, calculated at his standard hourly rate, totaling $47,500. The HOA is permanently enjoined from interfering with Chen family mooring rights. Furthermore, the court notes that under the original 1973 agreement's reverter clause, the HOA's attempted revocation technically triggered the pier's return to the Chen family. However, in the interest of community welfare and given the HOA's corrective actions, the court declines to enforce this clause, provided the HOA acknowledges the Chen easement publicly and permanently. David forwarded the ruling to Morrison's office and copied all 200 homeowners on the community email list. Within an hour, his phone started ringing. The first call was from Tom Patterson, 78, one of the original homeowners who'd signed the 1973 agreement. David, your grandfather was a good man. I'm sorry these new people didn't understand what he did for this community. Thank you for not taking the pier back. You would have had every right. David felt his throat tighten. He built it for everyone, Tom. That was always the point. By noon, Melissa Hartwell had resigned from the HOA board. By 2, the other 2 board members who'd voted for the fines followed. Morrison sent David a formal apology, admitting he should have researched the title history before filing. The HOA treasurer, Margaret Kim, who'd voted against the fine from the start, called David directly. David, on behalf of the reasonable people in this community, I'm sorry. We're holding an emergency election next week. Would you consider joining the board? We need people who actually understand property law. David stood at the pier that evening, bolt cutters in hand. He'd considered making the HOA remove their chain, but he wanted this moment for himself. The lock broke with a satisfying crack and the chain fell into the water with a splash. Emma stood beside him, recording it on her phone. "Dad, you could have taken the whole pier back. Grandpa's agreement said so." David coiled his mooring line properly, the way his grandfather had taught him 38 years ago. "Your great-grandfather built this so families could enjoy the lake. Taking it back would punish 200 innocent people for 3 people's arrogance. That's not justice, that's revenge." The following week, the HOA held its emergency meeting in the community center. David attended but sat in the back, letting new leadership emerge. The newly elected board's first action was installing a permanent plaque at the pier's entrance. Chen Family Community Pier, built 1973 by Chen Wei as a gift to Lakeside Estates. The Chen family's generosity created this gathering place for all residents. "We honor their legacy and their perpetual mooring rights with gratitude." 57 residents attended the unveiling. Many approached David afterward, embarrassed they hadn't known the pier's history. "The previous board never talked about it," one young mother explained. "We just thought it was always community property." 2 months later, David sat in his boat on a September morning, Emma beside him with her college acceptance letter. Stanford had offered her a full scholarship, partly based on her essay about witnessing property law in action and understanding that justice requires both knowing your rights and exercising them responsibly. "You could have been vindictive," Emma said, watching the sunrise over the lake. "You could have taken everything." David started the engine, the familiar rumble vibrating through the hull his grandfather had taught him to maintain. "Your great-grandfather once told me that the best revenge isn't taking everything someone has, it's showing them what they almost lost through their own arrogance. The HOA will remember this ruling every single time they walk down this pier. They'll remember that we could have taken it, but we chose not to. That's a lesson worth more than ownership." As they pulled away from the pier, David noticed something new. Several residents waving from their docks, fishing rods in hand, enjoying the morning on a pier that almost disappeared because 3 people forgot to read the documents that mattered most. David had learned long ago that sometimes justice doesn't come from destroying your opponents. Sometimes it comes from simply proving you were right and letting them live with the consequences of their own ignorance. And as the boat cut through the morning water, David smiled, because justice served with restraint was the most satisfying kind of all. Across the country in Charleston, South Carolina, retired civil engineer Patricia Montgomery, 56, received a cease and desist letter from her HOA demanding she remove the unauthorized garden structure from her backyard. Patricia read it carefully, then pulled out the original neighborhood blueprints, the ones she'd personally drafted in 1994 when she designed the entire subdivision. The garden pergola wasn't just authorized. It was in the original approved plans the HOA president had apparently never reviewed. Patricia picked up her phone, smiling. "Let's discuss what unauthorized really means," she said quietly. "But that's a story for another time.